Hello everybody, this is Ensign Rickey, and welcome back to the Lower Decks. In today's video, I will be continuing on with my two-part review of the Deep Space Nine series opener, Emissary. I will pick up directly where I left off in my last video on Act 8, and then all the statistical data I have gathered in this episode. If you have not seen the first part of this video review, I heavily suggest going back and watching Part 1 before heading into Part 2. So, without further ado, let us continue our journey into the Deep Space Nine series opener, Emissary.
Mission, and it's likely one of us will be killed. The landing party will consist of myself, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Ensign Rickey. Ah, crap.
Act 8. So, we open up with Ops as O'Brien says to Kira that he can reroute the power to get partial shielding, but parts of the station will be unguarded. Kira then orders Odo to start evacuating civilians to safer spots on the station. Kira then asks Dax how long it will take the Enterprise D to get back to the station. Dax responds, 20 hours from now. Kira then gives a short speech to everyone saying they have to hold out somehow until the Enterprise gets back. Julian says he can't believe the Cardassians would attack a Federation outpost. O'Brien quickly jumps in and then asks Julian if he's ever heard of the Federation-Cardassian border wars. O'Brien then adds, or the Setlik III massacre? Julian goes quiet, and then Kira adds that surrender is not a preferable option. O'Brien then adds, you know what they do to their prisoners, sir. Back in the wormhole, we get an even closer close-up on Sisko while he's still held by the white light void, and then we get brought back to the Saratoga. And then Sisko asks the aliens why they keep bringing him here. And then we get a trio of aliens, Jake, Jennifer, and the Bolian lieutenant, saying that he keeps bringing them here, and that he exists here. Sisko, now distraught, asks the alien for the power to send them all somewhere else, anywhere else but here. And then we get a shot of an alien Opaka telling Sisko that they can't give him what he denies himself. Look for your answers from within. Sisko, absolutely heartbroken, looks down at Jennifer and then back at the aliens. He replies to them he was ready to die with her. And of course, the alien responds with, you guessed it, die. What is this? But alien Jennifer jumps in and says, this is the end of their linear existence. Finally, thank God, they just might have got it. Alien Jennifer then steps up to touch Sisko's face, and then we get whisked back to Sisko trying to free Jennifer from the wreckage. And then we get a scene of Sisko watching the Bolian lieutenant drag him out the door and to the escape pod with Jake. Sisko then finally realizes that he never left his ship, and this is what the aliens meant. He never let Jennifer go, or this moment go. Sisko realizes that he does exist here. He goes back over to the pile of debris that held Jennifer, and sits looking at her. And then he mentions to alien Jennifer, who is now next to him, that he always sees Jennifer like this. Every time he closes his eyes, in the darkness, he sees her like this. And then alien Jennifer adds that none of Sisko's past experiences have prepared him for something like this. Sisko then says he's never learned to live without her. Alien Jennifer then says, so you choose to exist here. And then adds that this is not a linear existence. Sisko, now absolutely heartbroken and crying, nods in agreement and says, no, it's not linear. Then we get Kai Opaka looking over at Sisko now that he's learned the truth of why he comes here and why he keeps coming back here. Sisko looks and continues to release the pain, and then we fade once again into the bright light void. This whole scene right here is an amazing example of Avery Brooks' top-notch acting. His portrayal and his depth of emotion are phenomenal, and you will see as the series continues that he really does bring Sisko to life. Meanwhile, back on the station, the crew is making preparations for the impending Cardassian attack. Dax once again says that Gul Jasad is hailing them. He wants an answer. Kira asks O'Brien if he's ready. O'Brien responds yes, but when they penetrate the Thoron field around the station, they should be in for a surprise. Kira then orders O'Brien to fire 6 photon torpedoes across the lead ship's bow. O'Brien responds that they only have 6 torpedoes, and to which Kira replies that's fine, she doesn't intend to win this war with torpedoes. O'Brien then accepts the order and proceeds to fire the torpedoes. The volley of torpedoes fly right past the Cardassian ships, and this instantly gets Gul Jassad's attention. He then hails the station. Kira, now going up to the command position, accepts Jassad's hail. Jassad asks in confusion, "Is this your answer?" Kira, now throwing the bluff out there, says, "You didn't think that Starfleet left the station without any way to defend itself, did you?" Jassad starts to laugh and replies, "Defend it?" He adds that the station couldn't defend itself from 1 Cardassian ship, much less 3. Kira then says to Jassad, "You know, you're probably right. If she were a Starfleet officer, she might agree with him, but she's a Bajoran that's been fighting against the Cardassians her whole life, and she says he wants a war, she's gonna give him one." Jassad, now more confused than anything, thinks about this threat and then ends the transmission. O'Brien then looks at Kira, impressed with her bluff and the way she handled the situation, asks Kira for her to remind him to never get into a game of Roland and Wild Draw with her. Meanwhile, on the Cardassian ship, an officer comes up to Gul Jassad and gives him a tablet. He tells Jassad that it's a list with all the weapons and defensive capabilities of the station. He's trying to see through Kira's bluff. The officer replies that the station has a complement of 5,000 photon torpedoes and integrated phaser banks on all levels. Jassad, now completely dumbfounded, asks how the Federation armed the station, much less without their knowledge. And then Jassad openly states to everybody on the bridge that the Federation has somehow made an illusion of Duranium shadows to trick them. The younger officer then interjects and says, "What if it's not a trick? And then why risk the attack when the Fourth Order could be here in a day?" Jassad then replies back to the young officer and says, "If it's not a trick, Starfleet could be here in a day also." Back on the station, Dax confirms that the lead ship is sending out a subspace message for reinforcements. O'Brien then tells Kira that the ships are moving into attack formation. Kira then calls for the crew to go into battle stations. The Cardassian ships begin a phaser barrage on the station. The improvised shields that O'Brien made seem to be working at the moment. As the station starts to take damage, the civilians are starting to evacuate the promenade with the help of Odo. Back in ops, O'Brien mentions to Kira that he can create a pulse compression wave through the phaser banks and give the Cardassians a blast that might make them think twice. Kira agrees, and O'Brien sets up the procedure and then fires the shot. The phaser banks light up and send a blast to the Cardassian ship, or a direct hit, but it only leaves a scratch. O'Brien confirms that it was a direct hit to one of the cargo bays, with no casualties. Dax then tells everybody that the station shields are down to 27%. From the promenade, Odo calls up the ops and says he's got wounded people down here, and that has she seen the doctor? Julian responds and tells Odo that he is on the way, and then an attack takes out a generator and the promenade goes dark. O'Brien then runs over to a panel to fix it. Meanwhile, Julian makes it to the promenade. He finally spots Odo with the woman who's bleeding on the ground. He pulls out his tricorder and takes a reading on the woman, and asks Odo to apply pressure to the woman's wound. Odo tries to protest, saying he is not the person suited for this, but the young doctor stands his ground and basically makes Odo his impromptu nurse, whether Odo likes it or not. After a little time working on the woman with Odo, O'Brien finally fixes the generator and restores power and lights back to the promenade. Back in ops, O'Brien, tool in hand, comes up the ladder from fixing the problem. Dax mentions that the shields are now at 18% and failing. O'Brien, now returning to his station, tells Kira that he might be able to get one more phaser blast. But Kira declines this offer and starts to tell everybody that she's planning on surrendering the station, but before she can speak, Dax cuts her off, saying that she's picking up a huge neutrino disturbance. She adds that it's coming from 15 kilometers off the forward docking ring. And then finally, it's the wormhole. Kira then asks to put it on the screen, and then to hail the lead Cardassian ship. She then gloats to Gul Jassad, telling him, here's his wormhole. And then on the Cardassian ship, Jassad watches in disbelief as the wormhole opens up right before his eyes. Meanwhile, back in the wormhole, Sisko's runabout comes out with what looks like a tractor beam behind it. And then we finally see that yes, indeed it is a tractor beam. Sisko is towing Gul Dukat's ship out of the wormhole. This scene in general makes me wonder how powerful these runabouts actually are. Sisko hails DS9 and apologizes for being late, and that he had to help Gul Dukat with a little problem getting back from the other side of the wormhole. He also adds it looks like they had problems of their own. He then says that Gul Dukat had signaled the other ships to stand down and stop firing. Sisko then asks O'Brien to clear him for docking, and then he completes the order and clears Sisko. Sisko, Kira, Dax, and the rest of the crew are all smiles now that the conflict is over with. Sisko then enters the promenade and looks around at the wounded who are now getting attended to. He finds Julian and Odo helping the wounded woman on the ground and asks the doctor about the casualties. Julian happily reports 13 injuries and no fatalities. Sisko then finds Jake in the crowd and runs over to hug him. Now, before we go any further, let me take a second to acknowledge Avery Brooks and Cyril Lofton for their superb portrayal of this on-screen father and son relationship. Sisko was not only the best captain in my opinion, but an absolutely amazing father to Jake. We get to see this wonderful and warm side to Sisko every time Jake is in the equation. And to be completely honest, we didn't get to see any of the other captains in Star Trek on this level. A lot of the other captains had children, but nowhere near the relationship that Benjamin and Jake have. This arc alone, along with Joseph Sisko, who's played by Brock Peters, adds so much depth to Sisko's character, and Avery Brooks just brings it to life with his phenomenal acting. Avery can make Sisko the most fierce and intimidating commander breathing down your neck, straight into the most sweet and loving, wonderful man with the flip of a switch when Jake is involved. I would go as far as to say that this is the best father-son relationship in all of Star Trek, and both Avery Brooks and Cyril Lofton's performances were phenomenal and should be noted. In Star Trek, the subject of fathers is a touchy one. We get some decent fathers that are okay to their kids, but we also see some really screwed up fathers too. For example, a lot of people throw shade on the Worf Alexander arc, as well as some of the other Star Trek parents. But in my opinion, the worst father in Star Trek, hands down, has to be Sarek. He screwed up more kids in Star Trek than anyone. Just saying. Now, back to the story. Sisko and Jake embrace for a little bit, and then they walk off. And then we get a nice shot of the Enterprise D returning to the station. And then we get a commander's log explaining that everything on the station had returned to normal. And then the aliens have agreed to give safe passage to ships that enter the wormhole into the Gamma Quadrant. He also adds that with the arrival of the Enterprise D, the other Cardassian ships took off. And then we head back to Ops on DS9 in the meeting between Picard and Sisko. Picard explains that seeing a warship being towed by a runabout took the heart out of the fight. Sisko explains to Picard that they aren't done with the Cardassians yet, and that the wormhole has a huge strategic importance. Picard then explains to Sisko that he has put Bajor on the map, and that DS9 will undoubtedly be one of the Federation's most important posts. Sisko then asks Picard not to worry about giving the message to Starfleet to replace him, and that he will stay. Picard seems hesitant at first, but then he agrees. The two men shake hands and Picard wishes Sisko luck. And with that, Picard departs the station. Sisko, now with renewed vigor, assumes command of Deep Space Nine. And then we head to the promenade, where we see all the new crew members walking around talking with each other and adjusting to the station. We get a little scene with Kira and Quark, where Quark tries to make a small advance on Kira, but she shuts him down real quick. Then we end the episode with Sisko, O'Brien, and Dax walking out a door in the middle of some small talk. And then we get a nice aerial camera shot from the top of the promenade looking down on everyone. And then we close out with a nice shot of DS9, which is now surrounded in ship traffic. And then finally, we fade into the credits. The end. Memory Alpha facts and trivia. Alright, now that the main story is over, here's a little mashup I made called Life as a DS9 Prophet. Enjoy!
It is corporeal, a physical entity.
It is responding to visual and auditory stimuli. Linguistic communication.
Yes, linguistic communication.
What is this? Time.
The creature must be destroyed before it destroys us. Destroy it now!
Past?
Things that happened before now.
Destroy it now!
Experiences. What is this? What comes before now is no different than what is now, or what is to come.
The creature must be destroyed before it destroys us. Destroy it now!
Linear time. What is this? Lost? What is this? Pleasure. What is this? Wormhole? What is this?
Baseball? What is this?
Guy, what is this?
Alright, now it's time for Memory Alpha Facts and Trivia. This is another long episode, and I might cover a few things here that were covered in my DS9 series intro. So, with that being said, let's jump into it. At the time of DS9's creation, the head executive of Paramount Studios was a man named Brent Tartikoff. Tartikoff was responsible for giving the green light to DS9's creation. Tartikoff met with Rick Berman and Michael Piller to discuss the creation of a new series. He wanted the premise of the show to be like a Western, but in space. He wanted a father and son out on the frontier. This meeting led to the creation of Deep Space Nine. This was the first Star Trek series to be shot in one specific place, other than creating a show aboard a starship that goes many places. And the main reason for this was because they were already producing a show aboard a starship. So, they wanted to switch up the narrative a little bit instead of producing two Star Trek shows aboard starships at the same time. At first, they thought about putting the station on a planet, but that would have required too much location shooting and would have turned out to be way more expensive. Another reason the show was set in a fixed location was because the producers wanted to take a deeper look into the Federation itself and how it dealt with problems that don't relate to being on a starship. Since the show sits still, per se, it forced the Federation to confront issues that have lasting consequences. In the ship-based Star Trek shows, the Enterprise flies off to a location, they solve a problem, change it, and then they fly off with no regards to consequences whatsoever. But week to week on a space station, the characters have to live with the decisions they made the previous week. Another benefit to staying in one place was they got to build up quite a recurring cast of those characters on many different story arcs. This allowed multi-layered relationship building among the cast. DS9 has the biggest amount of recurring characters out of all the other Treks. In some cases, DS9's supporting cast was just as important, or sometimes even more important to the story, than the series regulars themselves. The cast itself was created mainly to cause conflict and tension, which was completely opposite from the serene and peaceful setting aboard Federation starships. Star Trek's creator, Gene Roddenberry, had very strict rules about conflict between Federation officers. He believed that the humans of the 24th century are more enlightened and should have no conflict with each other. So, to get around this golden rule laid down by Gene Roddenberry, the show's producers brought conflict to the characters on the station. This in turn made DS9 a very character-driven show. Unlike the other Star Trek captains such as Kirk or Picard, who are all explorers, Sisko plays the part of the builder. People who are loyal to Gene Roddenberry dislike the show because of its darker and grittier setting. DS9 also dipped its toes into the water that other Star Trek shows didn't tread in, and because of this, the show was heavily criticized throughout its whole run. O'Brien was made a permanent cast character on the show because the show's producers felt that Colm Meaney was far too talented an actor to waste. They also hoped it would give the fan base an old returning familiar face to relate to on the new series. The first officer of DS9 was intended to be Michelle Forbes, reprising her role as Ro Laren. This was also the reason the producers picked Bajor as a setting for DS9. Michelle Forbes declined the offer, and thus the character of Major Kira Nerys was created to fill the spot. In an earlier treatment of the script called The Ninth Orb, Ro Laren met with Benjamin Sisko for the first time right before his meeting with Picard, hence the first time Sisko meets Kira. Another plotline involved a black market on DS9, controlled by a man named Roulade. Sisko promises Opaka that he would take down the black market and Roulade altogether. Roulade had a secret base in the Denorius Belt, the same place that Odo was found. He was to be the person that informed Gul Dukat about the existence of the wormhole. This information would also then pass down from Quark to Odo. This entire plot was cut in later revisions, and Miles O'Brien instead gets a line of dialogue that says the Cardassian sensors must have picked up the wormhole, instead of going with the Roulade black market idea. In a memo from Michael Kuda and Rick Sternbach sent to Rick Berman, they suggested that Bashir mistook a preganglionic fiber for a postganglionic nerve. It also states that Jaros 2 had been misspelled as Jarvos 2, and that Kai Opaka mentions the orbs appeared over Bajor over 1,000 years ago. The latter would be because of the TNG episode Ensign Row. In this episode, they had already established that the Bajoran civilization flourished way before the humans were even walking erect. Since this dates back to about 450,000 years ago, it suggests that the Bajor go back that far as well. If this is true, then a 1,000-year-old sphere seems like a more recent event. He suggests that the first orb should have been discovered over 100,000 years ago, but in the final revision of the script, Kaiopaka states to Commander Sisko that the Bajoran orbs appeared over Bajor within the last 10,000 years. Michael Piller, the show's producer and co-creator, says he got the inspiration for the story of Emissary from a scene in the original Star Trek series pilot, The Cage. He recalls the scene where there is green fields and the picnic with Susan Oliver's Vina. Perhaps this is the reason why we got the picnic scene with Sisko and Jennifer when Sisko was in the wormhole talking to the aliens. The final script was submitted on August 10th, 1992. The producers also cited TNG's series opener, Encounter at Farpoint, as an inspiration for Emissary as well. They used the same method for introducing all the main characters in DS9, the same way they did in Encounter at Farpoint. They scatter all the different character expositions throughout the episode, but not having them appear all at once. They also used the same philosophical ideas behind Encounter at Farpoint as an inspiration for Sisko's meeting with the Prophets. In TNG, Q puts humanity on trial for being a savage race. While Sisko's meeting with the Prophets isn't exactly like Picard's meeting with Q, it's a very similar concept. The Prophets are putting Sisko and humanity on trial as well. As an example, cue my aggressive baseball player guy.
Aggressive. Adversarial.
I have no clue why I like this guy so much. In the show's beginning teaser, a scene was cut out where Sisko notifies the Saratoga captain that the USS Gage, Kyushu, and Melbourne are all deployed by Admiral J.P. Henson. The last two vessels I mentioned make an appearance in the TNG episode, The Best of Both Worlds Part 2. The Gage itself was to be a new reference and would be included in the Star Trek Encyclopedia. The script also mentioned that Jake Sisko's birth occurs in 2360, but then this gets contradicted in another episode saying that Jake was born in 2355. In the script, when Sisko arrives at the station, he's supposed to have trouble getting into the station because the Cardassians stripped all the airlocks, and stray radiation was blocking transporter use. O'Brien manually unlocks the door for Sisko and introduces himself. This scene was cut out of the final product, but in the last scene in this episode, O'Brien finally does get to say this little piece of dialogue as we fade out into the credits.
And 3 Frenalian science vessels are requesting permission to dock.
Problem is, we've been retrofitting the airlocks, sir. Half of them were damaged during the move, and most of the others when the Cardassians blew out the fuel conduit, sir.
I guess they'll just have to transport more.
Another line that was cut from the script was Sisko getting offered another opportunity from a university on Earth. This was something he was supposed to seriously consider. In the burglary scene that has Nog and the other criminal getting caught by Odo, Nog's companion was supposed to have a knife-like weapon to throw at Odo, but instead it was changed to a flail. Odo's whole upper torso was supposed to change when intercepting the knife throw, but this was later replaced with just changing his head. During Sisko's first meeting with the Prophets in the wormhole, the script states that any actor or extras within 50 feet of the camera were to stop and pay curious attention to Sisko, and all the actors that were beyond 50 feet were to act like normal background extras. 24 minutes of footage was cut out of Emissary, in which director David Carson hopes might be restored at some point. One of these deleted scenes features Sisko going back to Kaiopaka and returning the orb. He informs us that 14 planets have contacted the Federation to open trade routes through Bajoran space. He tries to tell her that the Prophets are just wormhole aliens, but she quickly dismisses his claim, saying that's why a non-believer was destined to seek them out, and that one should never look into the eyes of their own god. She was supposed to end this conversation with Sisko by saying his journey had only just begun. The deleted scene's dialogue was, however, still used in the Season 1 finale, In the Hands of the Prophets. In this episode, Vedic Wind tells Sisko that when she asked Opaka why an outsider was chosen, she tells Sisko because one should never look into the eyes of one's own god.
I once asked Kaiopaka why a disbeliever was destined to seek the prophets. And she told me that one must never look into the eyes of one's own gods.
Michael Piller, in the Deep Space Nine companion book, gives the reasons of how and why he created each character for the show. Jadzia Dax. The Trill is a great race. they had some interesting ramifications on TNG. A Trill character would provide great potential for dichotomy and paradox. Odo. We knew that we needed some kind of Data Spock character who looks at the world from the outside in, and the idea that an alien entity would have to find some way to pass as human was fascinating, and seemed to give us an avenue into the kind of complexion of humanity stories that we wanted to tell. Quark. A Ferengi would provide the show with instant humor and built-in conflict. I saw Quark as the bartender, who is a constant thorn in the side of law and order, but also has a huge sense of humor about it. He would be someone that obviously could throw a lot of story dynamics. Julian Bashir. We decided to create a flawed character. He'd have to be brought down to size in order to grow, and we wrote him as kind of a jerk for much of the first season. Miles O'Brien. After we decided we were bringing him over to the new show, we thought, how do we use him? We'd already decided to focus on Bajor, with his long backstory, establishing his bitterness towards the Cardassians, so it worked very nicely together. Kira Nerys. We liked the idea of having somebody working with the commander of the station, who would be a thorn in his side, who would represent a different point of view. We know we'd get conflict and interesting dynamics between the two characters. Benjamin Sisko. Every hero needs a journey. You want to take your leading man on a quest where he has to overcome personal issues as well as whatever space stuff happens to be out there. The idea of a man who's broken and begins to repair himself is always a great beginning for drama. Max Grodenchek, who is credited as the Ferengi pit boss in this episode, becomes a reoccurring character on the series named Rom, Nog's father and Quark's brother. J.G. Hertzler, who plays the Vulcan captain in the Saratoga, later plays a Klingon named General Martok, who in my book is probably the most honorable Klingon that Star Trek has ever had. Majel Barrett Roddenberry, wife of Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, provided all the dialogue for the show's computers. Mark Alaimo reprised his role as Gul Dukat through the show's 7-year run, even though he was not the first choice for the role. Aaron Eisenberg's Nog, who probably by far has the best character arc in the show, starts out the show as a petty Ferengi thief, but then later becomes the first Ferengi to join Starfleet. Mark Alaimo, Aaron Eisenberg, Max Grodenchek, J.G. Hertzler, and Mark Allen Shepard are the only actors besides the series regulars to appear both in this episode and the show's final episode, What You Leave Behind. Production designer Herman Zimmerman commented they had more money for DS9's pilot episode than they were allowed to spend on Star Trek VI. During the production of this episode, the producers were adamant on making the show look very different from what they have done before. The actual set itself was built with internal lighting to eliminate the need to move lights around to get a shot. They dimmed the lights to give the overall atmosphere a darker and grittier tone. The pre-production on Emissary began on August 11th, 1992, with all principal photography running the week after. One of the first sequences to be filmed was the Battle of Wolf 359. All the visual effects passes, plus the destruction of the Saratoga, were shot on a Paramount soundstage instead of the effects studio due to the use of actual explosives. The holodeck scene with Jake fishing on the bridge was shot at Golden Oak Ranch, a Disney-owned property. The first scene to be filmed inside the station was when Sisko enters the command center for the first time. Terry Farrell didn't begin to shoot her scenes until 11 days in, which by then the cast had already gotten to know each other. She would do up to 15 takes sometimes to get her dialogue right because she was overwhelmed by the whole process. To film the scene inside the wormhole with Sisko and the Prophets, director David Carson and director of photography Marvin Rush used unique filters and overexposure to create the blinding white light void effect. With each subsequence, the camera progressively gets closer to Sisko's face. 250 special effects shots were used in this episode. Emissary required a considerable amount of dialogue looping, mainly due to how many scenes were shot on location during its production. The set of the Saratoga's escape pod was actually a redress of the front section of a runabout. Jake Sisko's birth scene was actually filmed on the Enterprise D in its sickbay. Many of the sets are missing some elements that would be present in later episodes, such as Quark's replicators or glassware. This is the only episode prior to its discovery within the episode. The wormhole doesn't appear at the end of the opening credits. After it aired, Emissary scored at 18.8% on all the syndicated television markets, which makes it one of the most watched television shows in all of syndicated television history. This episode shares a name with the TNG episode called The Emissary. in which Patrick Stewart and Colm Meaney also star in the scene where Bashir and Odo are helping the injured woman in the promenade, was a callback from the 1970 movie MASH. In this movie, Renee Auberjonois plays Father John McCaughey and is asked to assist a military surgeon in the OR, in which he also awkwardly complies. Gilgo Beach, the place where Sisko met his wife, is located in Long Island, New York. An unused line of dialogue from the second draft of the script would have established that Benjamin and Jake Sisko arrived at DS9 on an Excelsior-class vessel during the beginning teaser. This episode was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards, a distinction it shares with only 3 other episodes of Star Trek. It won an award for Outstanding Achievement in Special Visual Effects, but it was also nominated for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Art Direction for a series, Outstanding Individual Achievement in Sound Editing for a series, and Outstanding Individual Achievement in Sound Mixing for a drama series. Dennis McCarthy, a longtime Star Trek composer, scored this episode and won an award for DS9's theme music. Rick Berman brought in production designer Herman Zimmerman to work on DS9 and create the look for the station. Zimmerman states that in pre-production, he went through many different drawings for the station, as he was left to his own devices because a script had not been produced for the show yet, and most of the producers at the time were busy handling TNG's 5th season. So, with no decorative input from the producers and no scripts to work from, the station was changed many different times. Zimmerman explains, the exterior of Deep Space Nine was created of 3 concentric horizontal rings. The outer ring is a docking ring, the middle ring was an environmental and cargo ring, and the center ring was the promenade and the power core of the station. And he placed the station's operations center right above the power core. He explains that they created the fact that the Cardassians like things in 3s, so they made the station out of 3 rings. On the outer ring, there are 3 vertical pylons that are docking pylons. The vertical pylons also act as docking positions, and at the very end of these pylons are the integrated weapon banks. These weapon banks were all arranged mathematically in order to give a distinct look and a pleasing aesthetic when they are viewed from a distance. Production designers Nathan Crowley and Joel Hodges set the standard for Cardassian architecture. They designed it to be a mixture of pseudo-fascism and crustacean. They figured that the Cardassians were the bad guys, so fascist architecture, serious and dark. Herman Zimmerman explains that for the interior of the station, Michael Piller and Rick Berman originally wanted to have the station in ruins and to show neglect and disrepair, but the sketches just didn't work out. He points out that Robert Blackman had created the look and the uniforms for the Cardassians in TNG, so they took the look of this uniform and used it as a basis for Cardassian architecture. They developed the interior of the station to show the actual structure of the station, with support beams and columns sticking out so you can really see the bones of the station. Completely reversed from the Federation, whereas the Federation structures and ships hide the structure behind the walls and are not like the Cardassians' open architectural scheme. Overall, DS9 was supposed to have an intimidating look and feel, from its huge open beams to the shape of its windows, and even the station's doorways were all meant to look as foreign to the Federation as possible. The station's interior had many sharp edges and angular beams. This was to add drama and conflict. He also adds that Starfleet personnel will never feel like they're at home. They will never be fully comfortable here on the station. They will always be aware that this is a hostile alien environment that they're working in, completely different from the comforts of the Utopian Federation. During the Cardassian attack on Deep Space Nine, a supposedly solid column falls at the promenade and someone lands on it and it bends like foam. The wormhole effect itself contains water dripping in a pan. Bashir was originally named Amoros and was of Hispanic origin. This was later changed due to Alexander Siddig's Arabic heritage. When O'Brien beams the DS9 and the camera pans from the departing Enterprise to DS9, the music follows by singing from Alexander Courage's classic Star Trek fanfare into the DS9 theme. This is the first TV episode in a Star Trek franchise that does not begin with the traditional space, the final frontier, Prior to his posting as commanding officer of Deep Space Nine, Benjamin Sisko had served aboard the USS Saratoga, a Miranda-class starship. There was also another USS Saratoga, also a Miranda-class starship, that appeared in the TOS film Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. However, it is unclear as to whether the Saratoga from the film is the same starship as the Saratoga from this episode, but what is clear is they both had different registries. The director of photography, Marvin Rush, explains that the lighting in DS9 was far more diffused and contrasted compared to TNG. TNG's bridge had a huge light above it, which made the lighting seem more like an office space. In DS9, he was fortunate because all the lights in the station were integrated into the actual set. In turn, this led to some very interesting light-to-darkness variations. It was also easier on him because you didn't need to carry or move around the light rig from shot to shot. He also adds that when there was serious action going on in the scene, he contrasted the light much darker, which in turn added tension to the camera shots.
And last but not least, remember when I told you to wait till later about Sisko calling Dax old man? Well, in Avery Brooks' previous role as Hawk in his short-lived TV series, A Man Called Hawk, Avery's character has a close relationship with an older gentleman in the show he refers to as Old Man. And then we fade into
canon and continuity. Okay, now let's take a look at the canon and continuity of this episode. As I have stated before, this is a rather long episode, and I tried to get as many facts in it as I could. Here we go. Jadzia Dax changed the look of the Trills forever. Before Jadzia, the only Trill we see on screen is in the TNG episode, The Host. And he looks drastically different from Jadzia. The entire premise of the Trills had changed as well. Trills became a more true symbiotic relationship and not a dominant one. The studio executives felt that Terry Farrell was far too attractive to cover her face with any prosthetics. So, Jadzia Dax changed Trills forever. The Ferengi, who were supposed to be the new antagonists to the United Federation of Planets, were supposed to take the place of TOS's Klingons, after they aired on TNG for the first time in the horrendous episode, The Last Outpost. In DS9, however, the Ferengi are now a race of self-serving capitalists that have declared themselves of neutral political power in the Alpha Quadrant. With their mind on their latinum, and latinum on their mind, they are the greedy merchants of the galaxy. Their demeanor versus humans and the Federation are more neutral terms than the hostile terms we see in TNG. DS9 changed the Ferengi and made them work. And not only just work, but work really well. Jake and Jennifer's presence aboard the Saratoga makes this a first-time occasion we see a family aboard a Miranda-class starship. This was only previously known to happen on Galaxy-class starships. This is the Enterprise D's first of only 2 visits to Deep Space Nine. The other occasion happens in the TNG episode, Birthright, Part 1. This episode marks the only appearance of the Borg on Deep Space Nine. This episode debuts the new Cardassian military uniform, which will be used throughout the whole series. O'Brien mentions the Federation Cardassian border wars and the Setlik III massacre, in which O'Brien was a part of. He first mentions his time in the war in the TNG episode, The Wounded. He also notes that Kira, who was born under the Cardassian occupation, knows how the Cardassians treat their prisoners. During his orb experience on the beach, Sisko refers to his father in the past tense while talking to Jennifer by saying he was a gourmet chef. In the DS9 episode, Homefront, we find that the elder Sisko is still very much alive and not retired. Chief Miles O'Brien, who's technically not a commissioned officer, is called Sir by the transporter room ensign, even though the ensign technically outranks him. When Sisko and Dax cross into the Gamma Quadrant for the first time, the computer incorrectly identifies the nearest star system as a ternary system. It states that the star system is comprised of twin O-type companions. A ternary, also called a trinary system, would have 3 stars in it. As this one only has 2, it would be called a binary star system. Also, it seems highly unlikely that Sisko and Dax would know this system from memory. It is an obscure, uninhabited star system over 70,000 light-years from the Federation, and has only been scanned by long-range sensor probes. Yet, somehow, they both know off the top of their heads what star system it is. As a devout follower of the prophets, it is unlikely that Kira would refer to the station as God-forsaken. The opening crawl states that Captain Picard was kidnapped by the Borg on stardate 43997, and the Battle of Wolf 359 takes place several days later. The time skips to stardate 46379, which is supposedly 3 years later. Every 1,000 stardates equals a year, which makes it about 2 years and 4 months later, not 3 years. When the Cardassians arrive at the station, they are supposedly jamming all subspace frequencies to prevent DS9 from sending a distress call to the Enterprise. Yet, they are able to send a message to the Cardassian Fourth Order fleet for reinforcements. There is no explanation in the change of uniforms after Sisko boards Deep Space Nine. We see Chief O'Brien in the new uniform, division color on the shoulder under the gray tunic, while Sisko remains in the TNG-style uniform. Later, Sisko appears in the newer uniform, while Dax and Bashir arrive in the TNG-style uniform. Also, none of the Enterprise crew are shown in the newer uniforms, and even Chief O'Brien is in the TNG uniform when he revisits the Enterprise and is later transported back to Deep Space Nine. There are a few theories in place to discuss the difference of the uniforms. Number 1. There were uniforms for Starship crew and non-Starship crew. Or, number 2, a new uniform design was created and Starfleet members were allowed to wear whichever uniform they chose. However, the same issue would occur during the TNG movie Generations. This movie would air a year after this episode, and the crew would alternate between two style uniforms as well. Another small change to the uniforms is the shade of blue on the science uniforms. The TNG style was blue, while the newer style was more of like a teal blue. There was, however, a discernible difference in the style of uniform that was used on Star Trek Voyager. On Voyager, the tunic laid flat, whereas the style used on DS9 would stick out towards the top where it met the gray undershirt. There are also variations in the color of the undertunics as well. Sometimes it was gray, sometimes it would appear a light purple. Gray would eventually be the color they used on Voyager. Patrick Stewart delivers the first spoken dialogue in 2 series premieres. First in the TNG series opener, Encounter at Farpoint, and in this episode as Locutus of Borg. This would be Stewart's only appearance without co-star Jonathan Frakes as William Riker. The Prophets, Bajor, and Sisko's status as the Emissary was Star Trek's first introspective into the area of religion, or more specifically, how the mostly atheist and scientific Federation deals with cultures that are heavily religious. The Runabout made its first appearance in this episode. They were designed for the new series to make it unique. But the Runabout has made 2 more Trek appearances besides this, once in the TNG episode, Timescape. And then we see it again in the Voyager episode, Non Sequitur. All the Bajorans we see in this episode are wearing earrings on their right ears. This is because of a religious ritual that we see performed grabbing the left ear. This is most notable because Ro Laren on TNG wore her earring on her left ear, which later on will be established as being in the tradition of the Pa-Wraith cult, who are the Bajoran Prophets' arch-nemesis. Right before the Cardassian attack, O'Brien says to Kira, "Major, remind me never to get into a game of roulade and wild draw with you." This is never mentioned in a live Star Trek production again. However, in a Star Trek novel called Watching the Clock, written by Christopher L. Bennett, the game is played by the book's characters. They describe the game as being a combination of California lowball poker and Truth or Dare.
And then we fade into
technology and technobabble discussion. Now it's time for the technology and technobabble discussion for this episode. We do get a few terms worth looking into, as well as some new tech, so let's take a look. The Runabout. This series marks the first appearance of the long-range utility shuttlecraft named the Runabout. The Runabout is a ship that's larger than a traditional shuttle, but much smaller than a starship. Runabouts were equipped with weapon and defense systems, as well as warp capability up to Warp 5. It also offered additional living space as well as more cargo space than a normal shuttle. It had a much larger operational range than a normal shuttlecraft, and they were typically assigned to space stations. Sometimes, they were used as auxiliary craft on larger starships as well. The USS Cochrane. In this episode, Jadzia Dax and Julian Bashir arrive on the USS Cochrane, but this is not the only episode we see the USS Cochrane in. In the TNG episode, The Drumhead, the Cochrane transport an admiral to visit the Enterprise D to investigate the possibility of Romulan sabotage. Also, in the TNG episode, The Game, the Cochrane also transports Wesley Crusher to visit the Enterprise D while on vacation from Starfleet Academy. In the DS9 episode, In the Pale Moonlight, which I consider to be the best Trek episode of all time. The Cochrane fought in the Dominion War and reported a number of casualties listed on the personal status update in the wardroom. The Wormhole. The Bajoran wormhole is probably one of DS9's, and possibly the whole Alpha Quadrant's, most important reoccurring phenomena. DS9's wormhole is unlike other wormholes because it was artificially created by the aliens, aka the Bajoran prophets, that live inside it. A wormhole in general is just a passage connecting 2 points in spacetime held together by a conduit outside of normal space. Star Trek is definitely no stranger to wormholes. In Star Trek the Motion Picture, a quantum singularity acts as a wormhole and sends Voyager 6 to another region of space. When there, it lands on a planet of sentient machines and becomes V'ger. In both the TNG episode, The Price, and then continued on with the Voyager episode, False Prophets, we see the Barzan wormhole, located near the planet Barzan 2, that ends up taking 2 unlucky Ferengi and stranding them in the Delta Quadrant. They are later found in the Delta Quadrant by Captain Janeway and Voyager. This wormhole, however, moved unpredictably through different points of the galaxy, spanning the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta Quadrants. In 2372, in the DS9 episode Rejoined, a Trill scientist named Dr. Liana Khan comes to DS9 in hopes of using her theory to create an artificial wormhole. Later in the episode, Khan is completely successful and opens a wormhole for 23.4 seconds from the Defiance Bridge with the help of Jadzia Dax. In the Voyager episode, Eye of the Needle, Harry Kim discovers a micro wormhole in the Delta Quadrant. This micro wormhole is not only a mini passage back to the Alpha Quadrant, but it's also a passage back in time, 20 years prior to the episode. The crew eventually learns the latter when they finally make contact with the Romulan vessel in the Alpha Quadrant, but 20 years in the past. In the Voyager episode, Pathfinder, Lieutenant Barclay uses the Midas Array to open up a micro wormhole that connects both the Alpha and Delta Quadrants. This artificially created wormhole would allow Starfleet to have direct communications with the Voyager crew, which is lost 70,000 light-years away in the Delta Quadrant. The wormhole is only stable for a short period of time and then collapses. Barclay proves this theory after breaking into a Starfleet lab and activating the Midas Array himself. While inside the wormhole for the first time, the orb scans both Sisko and Dax with a low-level ionic pattern. Ionics are consistently used throughout all of Star Trek, but mostly as an interference plot that disrupts the use of tractor beams, sensors, and transporters. While mostly found in natural galactic storms or anomalies, ionics were a plot device used to strip away some of the best 24th century technology to add a little tension to the story. In one such case, in the TNG movie Generations, Data uses an ionic pulse to disable a defective plasma coil on a D-12 bird of prey. The D-12, which was commanded by the Duras sisters, launched a surprise attack against the Enterprise D when a well-planned scheme of theirs had compromised the shields of the ship by finding out the modulation frequency of the Enterprise's shields. Data initiates the procedure and attacks the D-12 with the ionic pulse, which in turn compromises the ship's defenses.
Any weaknesses?
It is a Class D-12 bird of prey. They were retired from service because of defective plasma coils.
Plasma coils? Is there any way we can use that to our advantage?
I do not see how. The plasma coil is part of their cloaking device.
Hitter! Would a defective plasma coil be susceptible to some sort of ionic pulse?
Perhaps. Yes. Yes. If we sent a low-level ionic pulse, it might reset the coil and trigger the cloaking device. Excellent idea, sir!
As their cloak begins to engage, their shields will drop.
They'll have 2 seconds of vulnerability, Mr. Data. Lock on the plasma coil. No problem! Mr. Warp! Prepare a spread of photon torpedoes. We have to hit them the instant they begin to cloak. I see. We get one shot at this. Target their primary reactor.
I have accessed their core frequency. Initiating ionic...
Fire.
Neutrinos. Anytime the Bajoran wormhole opens, Dax and O'Brien will comment that they see a rise in neutrino particles. Neutrinos are also heavily used in Star Trek. The presence of elevated neutrinos may indicate the presence of a cloaked starship, or be present when a wormhole opens. Here are some occasions where we see neutrinos at work in Star Trek. Antimatter reactors have been known to produce neutrino emissions. In the Enterprise episode, Civilization, T'Pol detects neutrino emissions from the Akali homeworld, a pre-warp civilization, which leads her to confirm that there is indeed an antimatter reactor on the planet.
Is there a problem?
I'm detecting neutrino emissions from a city on the eastern continent.
What's causing it?
Possibly an antimatter reactor.
These people don't even have indoor plumbing.
Maybe some of them are more advanced than others.
Or maybe we're not the first visitors.
In the TNG episode, The Enemy, Wesley Crusher uses a neutrino pulse to cut through the interference on the Galderon core to reach Geordi LaForge, who was stuck on the planet below with a Romulan officer.
Something. Anything to cut through the storm. Some way to get a signal through to him.
A neutrino pulse. We could build a portable neutrino source and send it in a probe to the planet's surface. It'll act like a beacon.
A neutrino pulse would send non-charged particles back up through the atmosphere and would be detectable by Geordi's visor.
He can show us that he's found it by modifying the pulse.
Make it so.
In the TNG episode, Matter of Honor, Mendon figures out that a tunneling neutrino beam can be used to remove the subatomic bacteria from the starship.
Sir, I have something to report to you immediately.
Yes, go ahead, Ensign.
I've managed to isolate the organisms on our hull. They are a submicron form capable of breaking nuclear bonds in the tritanium plating.
But can they be removed from the hull?
Yes, they are controllable and can be removed from the hulls of both ships by using a tunneling neutrino beam.
Thank you, Ensign. Well done.
In the TNG episode, Menage a Troy, Wesley Crusher suggests that by adding preprocessors to the Enterprise D's neutrino counter will boost efficiency.
Adding preprocessors to the neutrino counters boosted efficiency by 11%. Of course, Commander LaForge and Commander Data did most of the work.
Not so fast, Wesley. Reprocessing the data with an optical chip was your idea.
That is correct, sir. Although Commander LaForge and I designed the chip, Mr. Crusher derived the equation governing its operation.
The point is, you completed the upgrade well ahead of schedule. Very impressive.
Indeed. Fine work.
In the TNG episode, Power Play, Geordi LaForge used the neutrino field to isolate the Enterprise's cargo bay when aliens possessed Miles O'Brien, Deanna Troi, and Data, giving Picard time to deal with the situation.
They're firing up the transporter, Commander.
Mr. LaForge?
I've isolated Cargo Bay 4 with a neutrino field, sir. But it'll only take Data and O'Brien a couple of minutes to override it once they discover that it's there.
I hope that'll give the captain enough time to play his hand.
Do you know what he's going to do?
There's only one reason he chose Cargo Bay 4. If it becomes necessary, Ensign, he'll blow the Cargo Bay hatch on my orders.
Yes, sir.
In the TNG episode, True Q, Geordi LaForge attempted to infuse a reactor onto Gara 4 with neutrinos when it started to overload, but it was ultimately saved by Amanda, the newly found Q.
Mr. Wolf, see if there's any way that we can cut through the interference and beam them out of there.
Aye, sir.
Captain, Geordi is trying a neutrino infusion. It may smother the reaction.
Captain, there is too much ionization in the atmosphere. Transporters are useless.
It's no use. The heat has fused the injector shut. We're losing containment.
How long till meltdown?
A few minutes at most. We're going to have
Commander, look at this.
This is impossible. Captain, I don't know what's happening, but the reaction is stabilizing on its own.
In the DS9 episode, The Storyteller, O'Brien tells Julian that he finds out the illusionary attack by the Del Rock to the buildings in the village had traces of residual neutrinos.
There's some residual neutrino levels in the microstructure of these rocks.
If the Dow rock has no physical substance, how can it leave a neutrino trace?
Well, I didn't say it made sense. But this rock face didn't just spontaneously blow itself to pieces.
Lucky for us, you managed to stop it before it did any more damage.
All I did was repeat what the Syrah told me.
In that case, how did the Syrah manage to stop it?
Good question.
In the DS9 episode, rivals. Jadzia Dax finds out that 80% of the solar neutrinos in Deep Space Nine were all spinning clockwise due to a probability-altering device. She adds that neutrinos are supposed to have a random spin.
Kira said you found something.
Oh, I found something, all right. I just don't know what it means. Look at this.
Solar neutrinos.
Notice anything unusual?
There are a lot of them?
The spin. Given the laws of probability, from any point of view, about half of them should be spinning clockwise and the other half counterclockwise. But over 80% of them are spinning clockwise.
You're saying people are having accidents because of the way the neutrinos are spinning?
No, but I think it's a symptom of the same problem. The neutrinos outside the station are normal, but inside the station, something very strange is going on.
In the DS9 episode, Improbable Cause, Dax notices that a certain interference in a ship's transponder signal just before it exploded could have been caused by a forced neutrino inversion. Odo then adds that these type of inversions are found in Romulan explosives.
According to our sensor logs, the Flaxian ship exploded the moment its warp drive was engaged.
Was there malfunction?
Well, that's what I thought at first. Then I analyzed the telemetry from the transponder I planted on board the Flaxian ship. Just before the explosion, there was an interference pattern in the transponder's signal.
This interference could have been caused by a forced neutrino inversion.
The Romulans. They use neutrino inverters in their explosive devices.
Why would the Romulans want to destroy the Flaxians' ship?
In the Voyager episode, Dreadnought, elevated neutrino readings were used to detect the true location of the Cardassian-built Dreadnought weapon. This weapon was caught by the Marquis and reprogrammed by Bialana, and eventually was lost in the Delta Quadrant.
This course is erratic. Are we sure we're following a single warp trail?
Perhaps the missile's navigational system is malfunctioning. It's been operating for over a year, far longer than it was designed to function.
No, this is deliberate. It's following one of the evasive patterns I programmed into it. It must have observed us following.
I think I've got it on long-range sensors.
No, that's only a sensor echo. Dreadnought's programmed to deflect its image up to 100,000 kilometers from its true location. The next time you get a heading, look for a brief surge in neutrino emissions within a 100,000 kilometer radius. That'll be the real thing.
Got it. Elevated neutrino levels, locking in coordinates.
In the Voyager episode, Bliss, 7 of 9 discovers suspiciously erratic neutrinos when examining a deceptive cloud, which turned out to be an alien posing as a wormhole.
I've completed my diagnostic. Sensors are operating at peak efficiency.
Then there's nothing to worry about.
On the contrary, the wormhole's neutrino levels are extremely erratic.
I thought so too. Until I received this. Turns out those faint signals we detected were communiques from Starfleet. They assure me the neutrino flux is nothing to worry about.
Starfleet may be in error. We should run further scans.
No time. The wormhole might destabilize.
In the Voyager episode, Child's Play, Icheb designed a high-resolution gravimetric sensor array that scanned for neutrino flux that was associated with wormholes.
Now this looks impressive.
It's a high-resolution gravimetric sensor array.
Ambitious.
It'll augment our ability to scan for the neutrino flux associated with wormholes. It could help Voyager find a faster way home.
The engineering principles are sound.
I expected these projects to be interesting, but this is truly exceptional.
Thank you, Captain. I'm very interested in astro.
In the TNG movie, Insurrection, Data detects neutrino emissions coming from a lake on the Baku, and eventually finds a cloaked Federation holoship.
Tricorder functions are limited due to heavy deposits of kelbonite in these hills.
How about a passive radiation scan?
Curious. There appear to be strong neutrino emissions coming from the lake.
Thorons. When the Cardassian ships arrive at DS9 when the Enterprise D leaves the station, Kira asks O'Brien to use a Thoron field to block the enemy ship's sensors. Thoron is an isotope of radon, and mainly blocks sensors and appears in a few other instances in Star Trek. here's a few other examples of Thorons used in Star Trek. In the DS9 episode, Way of the Warrior, a similar Thoron tactic was used on the Klingons prior to the first battle of Deep Space Nine.
I'm aware of that, but maybe you're not aware of what you're risking. We've had a year to prepare the station for a Dominion attack, and we're more than ready.
You're like a toothless old Grishnar cat, trying to frighten us with your roar.
I can assure you, this old cat may not be as toothless as you think. Right now, I've got 5,000 photon torpedoes armed and ready to launch. If you don't believe me, feel free to scan the station.
It's a trick. An illusion created by Thoron fields and duranium shadows.
It's no illusion.
Thorons have medical applications as well. In the Voyager episode, Coda, the Doctor removes a hostile non-corporeal life form from Captain Janeway's brain using a Thoron pulse.
Something's happened. The alien presence is getting stronger again.
Fight it, Catherine. Fight it just a little longer.
I'll have to try a Thoron pulse.
My people are telling me to fight. They're trying to save me.
They're trying out of desperation.
In the Voyager episode, Basics, Part 2, Luce Suter uses a portable Thoron generator to block the sensors of the Federation tricorders that the Kazon were using to detect them. Suter adds that it was an old Maquis trick.
Search of all Jeffrey's tubes and conduits. Use the Federation tricorders.
Do you have a portable Thoron generator?
Yes, of course. We use it to treat radiation burns.
It's an old Maquis trick. Thoron particles neutralize tricorder sensors.
Mr. Suter, we need some weapons if we're going to retake the ship.
Alright, that completes our techno meanderings about this episode, and now it's time for those episode stats as we head into Series Running Totals. Okay, now it's time to total up the episode stats. Let's dig into it. For number 1, no crew members died in this episode outside the beginning teaser. Julian reports to Sisko that there were 13 injuries with no casualties during the Cardassian attack on Deep Space Nine in his absence, so no marks here. For number 2, no crew members broke the Prime Directive in this episode. Though, down the line, this one will probably get pretty skewed since the cast of DS9 is only partially Starfleet. Again, no marks here. For number 3, no crew members break any of the UFP laws or decrees in this episode. Quark's nephew Nog does get into a bit of trouble, but at this time, Nog still hasn't found his calling, so no marks here. For number 4, no crew members disobey orders from superiors. While the cast is sure not completely secure with each other at this point, this being the first episode and all, everyone worked together great in harmony. So, no marks here. For number 5, we get a few crew member moments in this episode. First off, Sisko saves the day with baseball, but while he's gone pleading for everyone's life in the wormhole, Kira holds it all together wonderfully in his absence. If anyone gets an award from me this episode, I give it to Kira 100%. She comes in with the commanding presence and bluffs the Cardassians, and when she is finally attacked, she commands everyone to defend the station phenomenally. O'Brien also comes in big in this episode, with that spot engineering mastery using the duranium shadow technique to fool the Cardassians, flying the station to the wormhole, and for giving the station that was literally defenseless shields to help against the Cardassian attack on the station. So, 3 big marks here. For number 6 in diplomatic relations, this again goes to both Sisko for dealing with Opaka and the aliens that don't know time, and for Kira for dealing with the Cardassians like Bobby Fischer plays chess. So, 2 good marks here. For 7 and romantic relationships, no big news here. Julian would love to have a relationship with Jadzia at this point, but Julian's pretty much looking for anything with a heartbeat at the moment, so no marks here. For 8, and crew member activities, or hobbies, we of course have baseball. Sisko's character was written with an undying love for the good old American pastime, but this was because the episode's writer and the series producer, Michael Piller, loved baseball. Other than this, O'Brien mentioned to Kira during the Cardassian attack that he wouldn't want to play a game of Roland and Wild Draw with her. So, 2 marks here. For number 9, and out of character decisions, the crew is brand new, so we don't have any anti-character moments in this episode. We are still just trying to get to know the characters at this point, so no marks here. For number 10, and crew members' self-sacrifices, everyone pretty much puts their life on the line in this episode, and they all work together wonderfully to accomplish the goals that they needed to. If anyone, I will give Sisko the benefit of the doubt by saving everyone by playing baseball with Bajor's profits, so 1 mark here. For 11, and brilliant crew member tactics, the award goes straight to Kira. Kira comes out as one of the strongest characters, if not the strongest character in this episode. By bluffing the Cardassians and commanding the station while Sisko was gone, she was phenomenal. She really digs in and gets the job done. So, 1 mark here. For number 12, and crew member previous posts or assignments, we have a few here. We see in the teaser that Sisko was posted to the Saratoga in the Battle of Wolf 359. O'Brien is coming straight off the Enterprise D under Captain Picard. Even though they weren't officially posted to the ship, Jadzia Dax and Julian Bashir arrived to the station aboard the USS Cochrane. So, 2 marks here. For number 13 and crew member promotions, O'Brien is pretty much the only one here. He gets promoted from the Enterprise D's transporter chief to the station's chief engineer. That's a pretty big promotion for him. So, 1 mark here. For number 14, major battles or events, we have a few. First, Sisko takes part in the Battle of Wolf 359 during the teaser. O'Brien also mentions that he was at the Setlik 3 massacre during the Cardassian Federation border wars. And of course, the discovery of the Bajoran wormhole, which is had by all. So, 3 marks here. For number 15 and awards and ceremonies held for crew members, we have nothing in this episode. So, no marks here. For number 16, and if the crew saves the galaxy, we kinda get a mark here. Sisko bargains with the wormhole aliens and achieves peace for ships to pass through. If things had went south for Sisko in the wormhole, who knows what kind of trouble others could have got into with the knowledge that the wormhole is there and active. Kind of a bigger picture save. So, 1 mark here. For number 17, and catchphrases, or memorable dialogue, we have Quark in my opinion. Never trust Dale from a God-fearing people. I love this line. And then he adds the Starfleet commander line afterwards. I almost can't wait till we get an episode with Garrick in it, because he undoubtedly has the best lines in all of DS9. So, 1 mark here. And finally, for number 18, and changes to crew personnel, we have nothing. The crew is assembled this episode. So, no marks here. And that pretty much covers the series running totals from this episode. So, let's jump into my rating and personal thoughts. Alright, now it's time for the final part of my video review of DS9's Emissary. Let's see how the IMDb rates this episode and compare it to my personal rating, and then I will give a few parting thoughts. Now, let's take a look. The IMDb rates this episode at 7.5 stars and places it at 376 out of the 726 episodes of Star Trek. Keep in mind, they haven't included Star Trek Discovery Season 2 yet, but they have commented it will be on there very soon. In my opinion, this is kind of low because this was an amazing episode of Star Trek all around. So, I'm going to give Emissary a Deep Space Nine score of 8.5 stars, since it's a pretty solid episode of Star Trek and does have some great elements. This episode also blows away TNG's season opener, Encounter at Farpoint, by a long shot. At this point in Trek history, the producers had a firm grasp in producing Trek. They absolutely knew what they could and could not accomplish by this time. A lot of work and thought was put into making this season opener stand out. This episode is my second overall favorite Star Trek series opener. My favorite series opener would have to be Enterprise's Broken Bow, which in my opinion is the best series opener out of them all. Star Trek Enterprise is also my second favorite Star Trek series, but in all honesty, nothing can top the amazing achievement of DS9. I feel this is when Star Trek was at its best. I couldn't give this episode anything lower than an 8 to be honest. For my overall Trek rating on this episode, I'm going to have to go with at least an 8. This was an important episode, and it was produced phenomenally. Both the actors and the writing was great. Other than the confused wormhole aliens who have no clue what anything is, this episode definitely scores an 8 for me. So, with all that said, I loved Emissary. It has many of the elements that make a Star Trek episode great. It also raised the stakes for the franchise as a whole. They really did do a great job all around with the cinematography and all the special effects, especially for this time period. Captain Benjamin Sisko is by far the most fleshed out captain in the whole Star Trek franchise. We will find out more about Sisko and his history than any other Star Trek captain, his hobbies, his family, his interests, and he ultimately has a great character arc through the whole show. By the end of DS9, you really get to know Sisko deep down. All of his emotions, all of his fears, his hopes, everything. This show also opens up much of the mythos behind Star Trek as a whole, and sheds light on many different aspects that the other shows just glanced over. Now, with that all the way, well everybody, that was it for my Ensign's review of Star Trek Deep Space Nine's season premiere episode, Emissary. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope perhaps maybe you've learned a couple things along the way. And as I have stated before, none of my videos are short by any means, so if you have made it this far, thank you. But this time, I need your help. For my next Ensign's review video, I'm going to be taking a little short break from Trek, and I'm going to be jumping into another franchise. This doesn't mean I'm not going to stop making videos in Trek, because I have a lot of Trek videos planned here coming out soon. But I just want to take a little breather and start up another franchise on my channel. And the two franchises I've been thinking about doing in particular are Stargate and The Expanse. I would start off with the series intro like I normally do, and then I would jump into the Season 1 premiere opener and review that episode kind of like what I did here with Emissary. I wanted to do Stargate because I deeply love this franchise. Stargate offers some amazing science fiction television, and it has a lot of lore and a lot of backstory, and I think it would be fun to do. But I want to do The Expanse because Season 4 is dropping here on Amazon pretty soon. And if you haven't watched Seasons 1 and 3, I suggest go out and stream them because Seasons 1 and 3 are amazing. And they haven't said yet if they're going to do an episode by episode or they're going to drop it all at once. But we should find out here real soon. So let me know. What do you think I should review next? Should I go Stargate? Or should I go The Expanse? But until then, my name is Ensign Rickey, your YouTube resident redshirt, and I'm coming at you from the lower decks. And if you like what I do, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can see when I release new content. With that all being said, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Peace.